Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of Fred and John Talks. Hi, my friend John.
I'm John.
That must mean I'm Fred by process of elimination. Love the hat, and today I'm sporting my white Adidas baseball cap. Well, for those of you who have seen our videos, you will know this. For those of you who haven't, you're about to know it. We've done quite a few episodes on the topic of loneliness, and we do so for good reason. Today's episode is called Loneliness in America, and I just want to say a word about that, and then John's going to take the lead today. John, loneliness has been identified as an epidemic in this and other countries. I read an article entitled, I read an article that said about loneliness that there are more Americans living alone than at any other time since they started taking the census. So we're talking about especially the chronically lonely, because the epidemic doesn't stop at just feeling lonely. The chronically lonely suffer more medical problems, as in physical.
I'm going to get into that.
More trips to the psychiatrist, more psychiatric medicines, shortened lifespans. It's a killer. As I've quoted before, but it's too good a quote to not repeat, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who it came out after her death in her letters, said that she repeated in her letters, "I'm unbearably lonely." And then she said this, and I quote word for word, "Loneliness and a feeling of not being wanted is the most terrible poverty." So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who has a lot of material for us today, and of course I'll be chiming in, and take it away, John.
Thank you, Fred. First off, I don't recall whether I've worn this cowboy hat. This is another one of my favorites, Fred. It's made by Bailey's, and it's 100% felt. I bought this rascal in, I think, Virginia City, Montana, when I was out watching wildlife.
It's ironic that you live in Virginia and you bought it in Virginia. There's a town named Virginia.
Virginia City, Montana. Oh. Yeah, it's a very historic place.
That must be a great place to buy hats. Cowboy hats.
Oh, they had a lot of Western wear, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, today's topic, America. There is hope in America about loneliness, in my opinion, Fred. A couple of things I'm going to go over. One is, in Connecticut, in the last couple of months, you showed me a newspaper article from the Stamford Advocate.
My brother Jimmy sent it to me. That's my hometown.
Fred's hometown. And I was pleased to see that a state senator of Connecticut, Senator Chris Murphy, teamed up with a Connecticut state representative, Kadeem Roberts. And they held a Norwalk City Hall roundtable meeting. A great newspaper article about it.
Oh, it was so edifying to read that.
Absolutely. And
you want people to see your glasses?
This precipitated. this precipitated.
That's how well we get along. I can say things like that to him.
This precipitated me to want to get more into the American, what's going on in loneliness in America.
Yeah.
And their roundtable is quite expansive. And so for our viewers and listeners, please, if you're from Connecticut, make an attempt to reach Senator Chris Murphy or your state representative, Kadeem Roberts, and find out where are they going with this in the community. They're going to try and take action and meet with stakeholders. People involved with boys and girls clubs, shelters. I think there's a woman in Western Connecticut, her name is Ginger Smith, and she started an organization called Soar Together. SOAR, like soaring birds, like
Yeah.
let's lift ourselves up.
Yeah.
So for those of you who live in Western Connecticut or are familiar with Ginger Smith, who started SOAR together, look her up. She's involved with this whole movement. So your state of birth and where you grew up, Fred, in Reading, I think, or is it Redding? Is
Yeah.
that Reading? Reading?
Redding.
And Easton are all on board, it looks like, to try and move the ball forward in loneliness. Well, this is historic because Connecticut is the first state of the Union to take action on loneliness.
And not to, this is probably premature, but on a note of hope, you and I have been talking about, almost with envy, I mean, I feel envious about, Great Britain and Japan.
Yes.
And you and I have been saying off
Yes.
camera, we wish there could be a national conversation in America, and this could be a first step.
We've been talking about that and hoping, and maybe our viewers will start bugging their representatives, bug their local politicians, talk to their city council members in their communities,
Yeah.
statewide, countywide.
Create a conversation, even if it's just, state to state to state, one state after another, like they're falling like dominoes.
Correct.
In the good sense. And then that could lead ultimately, I know it sounds grandiose, but
Everything has to start
has
one
to
place.
start, there's a Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Correct.
So, that could be something.
Well, we spent a bit of time on the UK model, and they're to be commended in the UK because they're the first country to tackle the whole the whole situation as a country through their government structure. And so they've published reports for the last 5 years. So they're ahead of us in terms of, I don't think the United States has a governmental U.S. approach to attacking loneliness yet, but it looks like that's changing.
Do you have you read anything or gotten wind of anything where the Connecticut politicians are aware of what's going on in the UK?
I have no information about that.
No information about that. Okay.
What I thought was interesting when I was doing the UK research is that the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge used to do a mental health minute. They would go on the BBC and they would interrupt the BBC and interrupt television and do a mental health minute.
Is that right?
Imagine that. If we were doing something like that in the States.
Oh.
You remember when you would look at the television to watch a frying pan and an egg breaking into it,
Yeah.
and our federal government was saying, don't do drugs.
Yes.
This is
your brain on drugs.
This is brain on drugs. Well,
Yeah.
we need a whole campaign from our federal government like that.
John, in light of what you just told me about the Duke or whatever,
Duke and
I
Duchess.
wish I was a Duke here in America. I do mental health minutes, with my counseling and mental health work. That's a joke.
So Britain did share all their results in the last 5 years with Japan, Sweden, Denmark, and the United States. So I have a feeling that somewhere along the line, these Connecticut politicians had to have come across it.
I wouldn't doubt it.
So that's kind of a baseline, and we know that there are very high-risk groups for loneliness. You mentioned some of them in your intro.
I left out suicide.
Suicide is an endpoint for a lot of people who go through mental health issues and depression. But the British study and even the American studies are showing that the younger populations from 13, 14 up to 34 to 40 years of age is a rapidly growing continuum group, meaning that just in that short span of time, more of them are progressing into loneliness compared to the 65-year-olds and older. It's like when you get to 60, 65, you've adapted, been able to adopt maybe some mechanisms, or you've tried to cope with it. But these younger individuals from 16 to 30 odd years are rapidly going up.
What I would add to that is over the course of my counseling career, up until the last 5 years, so really it coincided with COVID a lot, the population with the highest level of suicide were older men living alone, widowers,
Yes.
guys who had never married,
Yes.
etc., and higher rates of depression. And as we know, depression has a high correlation with, at the very least, suicidal ideation, thinking about it, and at the worst, attempted and successful suicides. But now you're right, and I think it was getting bad before COVID, but COVID made it take off like, you know, a NASA rocket. Loneliness and suicides in the age group you just mentioned, teens through 30s, is on a meteoric rise.
And they're less connected. They think they're connected and they're not connected.
They're artificially connected. That's not real connection.
Correct. So that brings me to wanting to share with you something I watched on a news report, and I sought out on my iPad, and I thought, okay, what is it that the U.S. Surgeon General report of May 2023, what does it actually show? So we have, to my knowledge, Fred, this is the first report from the U.S. Surgeon General on loneliness, 2023.
From the U.S. Surgeon General?
Yes, from the U.S. Surgeon General. Now, this is important because what he came out and said is what's called a public health advisory. I'm going to read what the Surgeon General's advisory is.
Okay.
A Surgeon General's advisory is a public statement that calls the American people's attention to an urgent public health issue. That's like the Surgeon General saying, we've got to watch out for the flu. We've got to watch out for this COVID epidemic that's upon us.
We got to avoid smoking cigarettes.
We've got to avoid smoking cigarettes.
Which I don't.
But it's on this kind of parallel. So
I don't avoid it as well.
Don't get into that, Fred.
Sorry.
So he making a statement like this in 2023 is the first time the U.S. is becoming participatory, in my view, on a global scale.
Then it's only one logical step to the startup in Connecticut.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's linked.
Okay.
So it goes on to say that this health issue, because it's urgent, the Surgeon General is providing recommendations for how it should be addressed. And advisories like this are apparently reserved only for significant public health challenges and require the nation's immediate awareness for action. That's what the advisory means. So I mean, that's pretty jam-packed.
That's hard-hitting.
Yeah, it is hard-hitting. So from that, you go to issues that you brought up before of what about health impacts? Because this study, and I would implore our viewers and listeners, go to the U.S. Surgeon General's report on loneliness, May 2023. It's jam-packed with information. Good graphics. It's very readable and very understandable, and it's very much in depth. It has a few action plans, not as extensive as what they're doing in the UK, because the UK has got an action plan that goes through their Health and Human Services. Through
cabinet level position,
cabinet level position.
Minister of Loneliness.
Minister of Loneliness. We're not there yet. But this report is a very, very good start. So,
extremely encouraging.
Encouraging. There's been a lot of research, and you're aware of this being a mental health care counselor. A lot of research has been going on over decades about loneliness.
Yes.
It's just that it doesn't look like it's been concentrated, brought to the attention of public officials to the extent that it's now a public awareness problem.
It's been written about, and statistics have been cited for decades, but until now, I'm not aware of anybody, politician or not, saying, what should we do about it?
What should we do about it? And let's talk about it.
Or what can we do about it?
And
let's talk about it and spread the word.
That's the first thing that the British government did. One of their main objectives was, let's get rid of the stigma,
Yeah.
bring it to the fore.
Yeah.
This is a public health menace. We've got to talk about it.
Yeah.
You're right.
Right.
So, out of these studies that the Surgeon General talks about, I think 148 studies the HHS reviewed, and they reviewed them over about 7.5 years, suggests that increased social connection increases the odds of survival if you're lonely by 50%. So if you're lonely and you make contact with somebody, and if you start doing something active about making connections, if you start going to church or inviting people over for dinner or make some kind of social connection,
Yeah.
or the more social connections you have, what they're showing through research is the more social connections you have, the better chance you have of survival. And when you
and thriving.
And thriving. And when you come down to the 50% level and you don't have that many connections and you have fewer and fewer and fewer connections, then you're more into the group that's not going to survive. So that's...
Then you're more in the danger zone.
Absolutely. And I will go back to smoking for a minute, Fred, and this is not to hit on you, but one of the graphics they showed is that smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day is the equivalent of being at risk for loneliness and premature death. Premature death. And the graph actually shows that lacking social connection is far worse than air pollution, obesity, physical inactivity, not being active, drinking 6 alcoholic drinks a day. Lacking social connections is worse than that, and it's actually worse than 15 cigarettes per day.
Which harkens back, ladies and gentlemen, to why I'm always putting out recommendations on and off camera to friends, even to some of my clients, to watch our first video. It's called The Introduction.
Yes.
And we lay out in that video, it's not real long, but we tell the story of how we met and became friends and the why of behind why we're doing this. We've been doing this YouTube channel, and that is our belief in the absolute importance for thriving of having good, close friendships.
Absolutely. And more connections, the better.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, when you get to some of the other aspects of the Surgeon General's report about health outcomes that are now quantified, it's kind of scary. One of the reports shows that you have a 26 to 29% increased mortality rate if you live lonely. In other words, if you're in the bottom half of the 50% of people who are chronically lonely, not able to get out of that category, not able to come up the ladder with more friendships, more connections, you're more likely to just die, which you kind of mentioned. But then there's a 29% link to heart attacks and cardiovascular disease.
That's a high percent.
29%, that's almost a third. Okay. Now we know that cardiovascular disease is one of the commonest diseases in the country, linked with a lot of other factors. But if you link those other factors with loneliness, then you're scooped up into like a 29% group. Okay.
I don't think I ever mentioned this before on camera, but if you don't mind,
Yeah.
I attended a conference. This goes back probably a good solid decade. I attended a psychological conference on aging and mental health. And I remember, now I'm starting to smile. I shouldn't be smiling at this, but I'll explain that.
You are getting ill. You are getting older.
Yeah. Well, at one point, it was a day-long conference. So aging and health, aging and mental health, physical health. At one point, he says, "Well, I have bad news and I have worse news." And my ears perked up because I said, what's he going to say now? And he said, as especially men, not that women are immune, but it's far more men than women. As men age and they're chronically lonely, the bad news is they have shortened lifespans, more mental health problems, more visits to the doctor. The worst news is that if they drink alcohol regularly and smoke cigarettes regularly, they are going to have their lifespans shortened by a lot. I can't remember what the number was. It's an average number.
Wow.
But that was the bad and worst news. And I remember saying to myself, oh dear, I'm in trouble.
I'm keeping you out of trouble. That's what the connection.
Because that's what the connection does. Yeah. And
in essence, a chance.
To end that segment and on a positive note, I have so many good friends. You're my best friend, but I have so many good friends that my body feels healthy, my spirits are high. So I think that's proof positive of if you have good social connections, that you enjoy, that you see friends a lot. Two of my friends were over for fire pit last night until late at night, and we do that 2 or 3 times a week.
It's helpful.
It's helpful, even though I tend to drink. I'm not an alcoholic. I might be in denial about that.
You need to invite more friends.
I need to invite more friends, and I smoke about 10 cigarettes a day. But the social connections compensate for that.
See, the outcomes of health, because as a retired physician, this is what worries me, to see documentation now that stroke can be associated as much as 30 to 32% in cases of people who are living chronically lonely or have lonely issues in their life that are taking hold of them. So anxiety, depression, suicide, we know is all linked to loneliness. And we know that there are all these high-risk groups, which in Britain they even studied the prisoners in prisons, and I don't think that's been looked at in the States that I know of.
I doubt it.
That's another group who, when they get out of prison, they're even more lonely because of being in prison.
They go out into the world, with no support system at all.
Correct. So I think it's good for our listeners and viewers on YouTube to hear that this U.S. Surgeon's report, they need to look at this and look it up, hhs.gov. It's a wealth of information. Now, when I was looking at that, I thought about a couple of examples of friends and people I know, Fred. But one of them we've heard about as a national figure, Nelson Mandela. Remember Nelson Mandela?
Of course.
He spent 27 years of his life in prison.
South Africa.
In South Africa. And before he died, one interviewer, it's a famous interview, a reporter asked him, "How did you survive, Mr. Mandela?" And he said, "I prepared." He prepared for when he was out of prison. He prepared for his maker. He was a very religious man. And he was basically saying, I didn't waste the time that I was in prison. I was working on self-improvement. I was working on becoming more identified with and living scriptural life and what I can do when I get out of prison. So I prepared.
Talk about heroism and tenacity.
You're a movie buff, and I just finished watching Maestro with
I just saw it.
Bradley Cooper.
I saw it New Year's Eve.
Okay, well, listen to this. One of the segments of the movie, he's being talked to. Bradley Cooper, who's Bernstein, is being talked to. They're sitting in a garden, and Bernstein is saying, "Well, life is complicated. I feel like a caged animal. Human beings are just they react to what's around them, to good and bad things, and it's just so complicated." And it led to him having male relationships and female relationships and living outside of his marriage. Fortunately, he had music to fall back onto. But the questioner said, "Well, what happens whenever life keeps getting more complicated and you can't keep up with things?" And he says, "Well, I guess you just become schizophrenic." You remember that?
I do.
So it's like you just become insane.
Yep.
Whenever you can't keep up.
It could drive you mad.
Drives you mad. So he had almost like a dual personality.
By the way, just an aside, I grew up with a piano playing mother, and like I often say when I tell this story, I was singing show tunes from listening to her on the piano before I was old enough to even know what a Broadway musical was or theater. I was so young. And I think one of, I'm not going to say the best because that's very subjective and arbitrary according to one's taste. I think one of the most brilliant musical scores to a musical play, was Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story.
Oh yes, it gets
The
famous.
music is absolutely brilliant.
Well, music is uplifting for so many people.
Oh,
It's a universal
the
language.
score is brilliant.
It's the universal language.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing I want to bring up is I have a friend that I was talking with, Fred, during the New Year's break. And he was telling me about a rather tough life he had led growing up with his mother and brother. The father, I guess, was gone. His older brother didn't want to spend that much time with him. And he surprisingly told me that he found solace in watching cooking shows. This is when he was 11, 12, 13, 14. So he's watching cooking shows, and he took an interest in that, even though he was home alone. He said, when I was home alone, I started watching cooking shows. And to this day, he now cooks for the family. He is teaching his kids how to cook, and his wife is enjoying watching him cook for her whenever she can't cook. So he took on the whole role of being the cook in the house because of being alone when he was in his younger years.
He was a latchkey
kid. Correct. So that's something that shows you that food in itself can be important. I was watching a news report the other day on Fox News. A woman by the name of Lisa Miller gave a great interview. If you haven't seen this, it's only about a week old. Lisa Miller on Fox News. It's about a 12 or 14 minute interview where she talks about a social media initiative called hashtag food not phones. You get that? Hashtag food not phones.
Not phones. Okay, I think I know what that means, but spell it out.
So Mrs. Miller talks to the interviewer and tells her that she's excited about this social media initiative of put down your phone. Put down your phone and talk to people and eat food. Share food and eat, and don't play with your phones.
Yeah.
Now, she also goes on to say that the initiative has shown from studies already that parents are sometimes worse than the kids, and they're setting very bad examples for the children. So that the kids feel that it's okay because mom and dad are doing it.
Sure, kids imitate their parents.
They imitate their parents. So I would suggest people who want to follow up with that, look up Lisa Miller. She's a USA consumer strategist, and she's associated with Southern Methodist University. She writes books. She has a 20-odd year career in being a consumer advocate and consumer strategist. Lisa Miller. So
for our listening audience, say that again, the hashtags.
The hashtag food not phones.
Food not phones.
Yeah, the study also shows that people who put their phone down didn't suffer from FOMO. Remember the FOMO, fear of missing out?
Yes.
Apparently, it's like if you put your phone down long enough, you go on vacation. Like your body relaxes, you become less tense, you become less depressed. You have, your blood pressure gets better, and it's like being on vacation. So look this up. Hashtag, food not phones.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me of. I've had many clients over the years, and this is not a new thing at all. But in the new age of technology, I have clients who go on vacation and bring their laptops and their phones, and they're doing texting and email. They're working while they're on vacation.
Then they're lonely.
That's not a vacation.
They're lonely.
Yeah.
Fred, did I say food? Was I talking about food?
That's another one of my favorite words in the English language. Fun, food.
Friends.
Hey, the 3F Club. Yes, you did.
That's a dangerous word around you.
It's a dangerous word around me, but actually in this case, it's going to be a very pleasant word around me, and it's going to be a teaser.
Tell me about it.
Okay. So, to wrap up this episode, I'm going to put out a teaser to our audience and to you, but I'm not going to give my whole hand away. So I got one hand tied like, you know, magician, you know, sleight of hand. We're going to do, but I'm going to take the lead. I'm going to make a recipe that is from, in my family background, my grandfather, well, it was started by my great-grandfather many in the early 20th century.
Well, they're in the restaurant game.
It started, I'll tell the story when I do the video, but
okay.
It wasn't always a restaurant. It started as a bakery. During Prohibition, it was a speakeasy, but then it eventually became a restaurant, family restaurant with my family, my grandfather and his brothers and sisters. And I am going to make a particular dish, which I remember as a kid being so delicious. And then I've been in search. Actually, I stopped. I gave up the search. I was in search for decades, going to Italian restaurants and ordering it at their restaurants, and nothing comes close to how delicious. Now, I wish I could share it with our audience when I make it, but
I'll take care of that. I'll do the taste test.
John will do the taste test, yeah. But it will be a note of pride for me to talk about my family background, my great-grandfather, who was a fascinating man, and I'll leave it there. So now I'll show my other hand, because that's all I'm giving away.
Well, Fred, I hope people enjoyed listening to the fact that there is possible change going on in America. We are a little bit behind as a nation in tackling loneliness because of its impact on health and people's lives. So you can also continue to look up the UK Cox Commission reports that have been going on since 2018. But it's important to look up the U.S. Surgeon General loneliness, impact on loneliness on health in the United States. And then if you are from Connecticut, or you want to see what's going on in Connecticut, anywhere in the United States, check out the state senator and the representative I mentioned.
Really well done, John. I think you got a lot of information out there.
Thank you.
And even though, and I know this because I've slacked off in recent years, but when I was a younger man, I used to write letters to the editor of the local newspaper. I used to write to my congressman. I've gotten a little lazy about that, but yeah, I mean, we're supposed to be a government, you know, by the people, for the people.
Of the people.
Of the people, whatever.
That's right.
So we urge you to take some kind of action if you have a stake in this, if you have a heart for it, if you know people who are so lonely and, you know, you can't solve all their loneliness, but maybe you can connect them. Look up the stuff that John recommended.
Volunteer.
Volunteer, right.
Join groups.
Right.
Invite your friends over for food.
Be a mover and a shaker. Be a catalyst. I keep referring back to our men's group, because our next fire pit night, and we get, you know, between 5, sometimes 8, sometimes one night we had 10, sometimes 12 guys who come once a month for fire pit night at my house, and we're a band of brothers, and that is another thing that it fulfills me. It cuts down on, I don't feel lonely.
It's
like
a social connection, Fred.
The social connections.
Ciao. It's a wrap.
Ciao. It's a wrap.